When the founders wrote the Second Amendment, they weren't just talking about having a firearm to go duck hunting. They had just fought the most powerful empire on earth with militias made up of farmers, blacksmiths, and shopkeepers. So when they said, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, they meant it. It's not a suggestion, and it's not a privilege. It's a right. They knew what tyranny looked like, and they knew exactly how to stop it. Armed, free men and women refusing to be subjects. They weren't throwing this in as a side note either. They were laying down a line in the sand because they understood something simple. An unarmed people were no longer free. Welcome to our republic.
When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political band,
sailors and airmen of the Allied Expeditionary Force.
Well, I think it's time we ask ourselves if we still know the freedoms that were intended for us by the founding fathers. Not one small step for man.
Those three hallowed words reverently dictate what you ought to be, what you can be, what you will be.
We pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor.
A well-regulated militia being necessary for the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Every word here has been argued for over 200 years. Well-regulated militia does not mean does that mean the National Guard, or does it mean ordinary citizens organized to defend themselves, right? The people. Everywhere else in the Constitution, the people means individuals, not government, right? To keep and bear arms, not just them, but carry them, or not just to own them, but to carry them and use them, shall not be infringed. That's about as clear as it gets. Let's give a little bit of historical context first, and we're going to go into this a little bit deeper. Why was it written? The Second Amendment came directly out of the Revolution. Colonists had lived under British rule that tried to disarm them. It's a classic English move, right? Bans on gunpowder, restrictions on carrying weapons. The first shots at Lexington and Concord sparked because British troops marched to seize colonial arms. The framers wanted to guarantee that that would never happen again in America. To them, an armed people wasn't a threat to liberty. It was a safeguard to liberty, right? And people are going to argue this all the time. We don't need guns to defend ourselves. Look at all these mass shootings. It's not a gun problem. It's a mental illness problem. We don't need to ban guns. We need to do better on classifying certain things as mental illness and go from there. Militias and self-defense. At the time, militia didn't mean a professional army. It meant every able-bodied citizen ready to defend their home, community, and state. Militias weren't optional. They were the backbone of national defense, right? The founders feared standing armies, right? They'd seen kings use them to crush liberty, and a militia system, armed citizens, was their answer. Now, the Federalists versus the Anti-Federalist views, right? So the Federalists argued the new government didn't need to fear militias. The people would always outnumber the standing troops, right? The Anti-Federalists didn't trust it. They wanted the right to bear arms written down so no federal government could ever disarm the people again. And the result was the Second Amendment becoming a part of the Bill of Rights in 1791. Okay? It's that simple, right? So let's talk about why states pass gun laws. So here's what the Second Amendment says again. The text is short and straightforward. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state and the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. On its face, that sounds absolute to me. Shall not be infringed. Here's where history and law collide, right? States regulate differently. I don't agree with this. None of us. The Constitution is the supreme law of the land. That's what I agree with. But the Supreme Court has ruled that reasonable regulations don't automatically count as infringement. Let's look up, I'm going to look at this real quick here on the fly. Let's look up what infringement means. The act of breaking the terms of law or agreement or violation, right? Let's look this up more. The action of limiting or undermining something, right? And I know people are going to say it's not limiting your right to bear arms. No, it's limiting my ability to get one. I live in Colorado. I have to wait. I can go to the store today, purchase a firearm. I have to wait 3 days to get it. Anyway. So it's example, right? Laws on background checks, concealed carry permits, right? I have to go to an 8-hour class to conceal or carry a weapon here, right? I have to go to a class for 8 hours and then shoot 50 rounds to show I know how to use a firearm, right? Like, I do think weapon proficiency is a good thing, right? That to me is infringement, right? Anyway, the militia clause. For years, some argued the Second Amendment only applied to organized religions, right? That interpretation narrowed things until more recent cases clarified it applied to individuals too. And here's some key Supreme Court cases, right? District of Columbia versus Heller in 2008. The court ruled the Second Amendment protects an individual's right to own firearms for lawful purposes like self-defense. I mean, that's a no frickin' brainer. That shouldn't even have to have gone to the Supreme Court. McDonald versus Chicago, 2010. Applied that ruling to the states, right? Applied that ruling to the states, not just to the federal government. But even in Heller, the court said the right is not unlimited. They gave example like bans on and carrying firearms in sensitive places like schools, government buildings, or on dangerous and unusual weapons, right? So is regulation unconstitutional, right? From the strict reading of shall not be infringed, you could argue, yes, any restriction is a violation. And I believe any restriction is a violation. From the court's interpretation, they say no. Regulation is allowed as long as it doesn't destroy the core right of Americans to own firearms for self-defense. California, you may need to listen. This is why some states have stricter laws while others are more permissive, right? The courts are still the referees on what counts as reasonable regulation versus infringement. And personally, I think the courts are wrong. I think, and I believe, any law that prohibits me from buying a firearm and conceal carrying it immediately is an infringement. But at its core, the debate is still the same as it was in 1787. This is what we have to think of. And I think lawmakers need to think of this. The question is the same as it was in 1787. Do you trust the people or do you trust the government more? The Second Amendment wasn't written for hunting or for sport. It was written by men who had to stare down tyranny with muskets in their hands. To them, arms weren't the cause of freedom's danger. They were freedom's insurance policy. I really appreciate you taking time to listen to me rant today. Very passionate about the First and Second Amendments. Remember, history is not boring, especially when one line in the Bill of Rights has fueled more fights, more lawsuits, and more passion than almost anything else in history. And it is America's freedom insurance policy. See you next time.